well, welcome everyone to our fourth Best Practices webinar. It's our fifth session of the year. Remember, we did have a live session, a special session with Olivier and Liz earlier early in March. But anyway, it's we're finding these Zoom style webinars are quite successful, and we're having a good time delivering them to you. So this one has the usual cast of characters involved with it, but we're welcoming back Deb Moreau, who's going to give us an update on some pests and her observations from the vineyard this year. Jeff will start off with a weather update, and then Francisco will go through some of the tests and phenological stages. So I'd like to welcome everyone, and as Francisco said, we are going to be recording this one, and it'll be shared later on the Perennia website and possibly through the GGAN's website. So another service that you can hold us to our words, and a resource you can use later on. So with that, Francisco, do you want to introduce Jeff and we'll get the session going?
Absolutely. Since the first session at the beginning of the season, we have like a very good update coming from Jeff Franklin, coming all the information from the research station, and also making some linkage with the weather and the phenological stages. So please, Jeff, the screen is all yours.
Thank you very much, Francisco. And I'm going to assume that now that I've been here 4 times, that people are starting to like the presentation. So I may stick with this format at least for the year. So good evening, everybody. Thank you for attending. So I'm going to start off by pulling up a graph, and this is a continuation of a graph that I started back in the very first session in May. And it just gives us a summary of where the average temperatures, the daily mean temperatures have been in relation to the trend line. So if you observe this graph, there's a gray trend line here. This is the average trend line based on 10 years of data. This is what we would expect the temperatures to be, the average daily temperature to be. And of course, the black dots are the observations of the daily mean temperatures for 2020, starting in 1st of January and ending as of yesterday. So you can see, we've discussed this before, in the winter, we were above average for a while, and then when we transitioned through average, and then into a much cooler period, late April and May, below average. And everybody was quite pessimistic at this point. We felt maybe we were heading back into a 2019 scenario with very late events happening in terms of all of the phenology, and we were nervous about that. But good news, about the 3rd week of June, things broke, not just the buds, but the weather changed profoundly. And we moved into this above average and average period. And if you look at the month of June, certainly there are many above average, more above average days than not. And as we transitioned in July, we've had this cycling trend again that we've seen before, where we have above average temperatures followed by a handful of days of below average temperatures, and back and forth. But anyway, at the end of the day, we've ended up being July being close to average, with June being above average, and so we're ahead of the average overall in terms of the growing season this year. So from average temperature, we turn to growing degree days, base 10, looking at largely the vegetative growth of the vines and a little bit of the fruit. And so if we look at this graph closely, the red line is the 2019 accumulated degree day value. The dark black line is the 5-year average, and I've thrown a couple other years of interest in there just for contrast. So as you can see, again, we started off this year, and I've truncated this graph a little bit in the time frame. I've started in the middle of April, but we started off our growing season in May. We were below average. We were dead last in terms of the years that I had presented on this graph. And of course, where we've ended up is pretty well on top of that that same group of years. So we've gone through an amazing transformation from the 3rd week of May onward, and our growing degree days are advanced. And I think a lot of people that are looking around the vineyards, seeing things that are happening, and they've been doing this for a few years, probably noting that things have been advanced. I've had some growers contact me thinking that they may be 10 days advanced. I certainly can't justify that by looking at growing degree days. I would say, mathematically speaking, we are probably about 5 days ahead of average for heat units. And we know that, or we assume that heat units are a good predictor of phenological stages, although they may not be perfect. So some might argue that we're a week ahead or 4 or 5 days ahead, but it's doubtful that we're 2 weeks ahead. Now, in terms of shoot elongation, sure, we could easily be 2 weeks ahead of where we were last year. And there are other reasons for that. I'm going to maybe touch on those a little bit on another slide. So the other part of the equation, the important part of the equation here is, of course, precipitation. Now, as in the previous slide, the 2020 data is the red line, and the black line is the average. So there's a couple interesting things about this graph that I'd like to point out. The time span for this is, of course, the 1st of January on to current, and this is accumulated precipitation. So if you look at the first half of this graph, this area in here, you'll see that the day-to-day changes, or these little stair-step events, are kind of small. And what those stair-step increases represent are a single day's worth of precipitation. And what happens early in the season is we tend to get many more precipitation days, but less amount of precipitation in each event. And that horticulturally, that's the best. That's awesome. That's what we like to see. But as we transition into summer, we get these very large daily accumulations of precipitation. So particularly this one here is the 73 millimeters that we received on the 8th of July. That's a very big event, 3 inches of rain. And if you look at the traces, the plots on this graph for the second half of the year, you see there's sort of a summer pattern. And in that summer pattern, we tend to get fewer events, but much larger events. And the main problem with this, it isn't so much 75 millimeters of rain. I'm sure we were able to horticulturally benefit from most of that, although some of that was runoff. But the problem with this is as we measured it right at the Kentville Research Station. And these very intense amounts of precipitation tend to be localized. So somebody, so Steve's Vineyard, he may not have seen 73 millimeters of rain on July 8th. He may have, in fact, I think he would have seen less than that. But that's what we measured in Kentville. In Wolfville, only short distance away, they received over 90 millimeters of rain. So it becomes a little difficult to talk about accumulated precipitation, generally speaking, across the whole growing region, because that's quite a diverse area. So, but anyway, I mean, I think the take-home point from this is, although we're trending a little bit below average precipitation, we're very close to the average line. We certainly have what I would consider to be adequate amounts of precipitation and soil moisture available for plant growth. So just to bring this into the perspective of the growing season, I talk a lot about the accumulated values for the whole year, but let's just talk quickly about June and July, because that's really our bud break here as we measured it in our hybrids was the 3rd week of May onward. Some vinifera wasn't until early June. So let's talk about June and July. So the mean daily high temperature for June and July of 2020 was 24.3 degrees Celsius. The mean daily high temperature for that same period of time, June and July, but for the 10 years prior to 2020, was 23.4. So there's about a degree's difference there in average temperature. We look at the daily low temperatures, or the nighttime temperature. We see for the period June and July 2020, 13.9 degrees. And we see the mean daily low temperatures for the 10 years previous to that around 12.7. So another full degree's difference. So in terms of heat units, we can interpret it directly into heat units, the way that they're calculated. So we are seeing on average a full degree day per day throughout the growing season, June and July. And that's meaningful, because as we accumulate that across, by the end of the growing season, that can result in another 100 to 150 additional degree days, which hopefully will bring some of our key phenological stages on a little bit earlier. So now just referring to precipitation, the accumulated precipitation for June and July 2020, 175 millimeters, compared to the 10-year average for the same time period of 162. So they're essentially the same. They'd be statistically the same. But you should note that 73 millimeters of that amount that we got this year came in a single event. And we know that when we receive precipitation that way, it's not always as horticulturally valuable as if it comes in much smaller increments. So talking about soil moisture, again, the 2020 data, or sorry, not soil moisture, but soil temperature, and specifically soil temperatures at 35 centimeters. We know that that's a good proxy for the health, the efficiency of the root system. We'd like to see higher temperatures in the root zone, especially early on when we're trying to move a lot of moisture up into the buds, allow them to break, where we're trying to move starch into the buds, because before leaves fully unfold, before we reach that 6-7 leaf stage, the plants are largely living off stored carbohydrates stored in the roots. And of course, the plant can't move that until the root zone heats up. So this graph, for reasons I don't fully understand, as I'm not an IT person, is a little hard for me to use the pointer with, but I'm going to try anyway. If you follow that red line from here at the in the middle of April to current, late July, we've gone from being, again, dead last amongst the years in comparison to being pretty well the top of the pack. But there's one very interesting event here I'd like to point out. So this, there's a spike here in the 2020 data. Let me see if I can actually point to it. It's a downward spike, which corresponds with the 8th of July. And that 75 millimeters of rain that we received on the 8th of July percolated down to a depth of 35 centimeters and had a net effect of dropping the soil temperature in that zone by a couple of degrees, 2 to 3 degrees. So when I see that, I have good indication that even though 73 millimeters is a lot of rain in a single event, we did get good soil penetration. Certainly, as we measured in Kentville, there was enough need or room in the soil to accommodate. We weren't so close to saturation that we couldn't accommodate that much rain. And so that's probably given us quite a boost in terms of growth and vigor of our plants. Because that 35 centimeters would be at the top end of the active root zone for most of our well-established grapevines. We're talking probably 2 feet, 1 to 2 feet would be the optimal root zone, or the zone where most of our roots exist or tend to exist in Nova Scotia for grapevines. So to bring that all together, heat plus soil moisture plus nutrients always equals vigor. Nutrients we kind of take for granted. If we have a good nutrition program, most of our growers here have that. We need the other two factors, the heat and the soil moisture. So as I've just discussed, soil moisture has been good this year. We're very close to the average. Certainly sufficient moisture to allow growth. And certainly we're a degree above average temperature. And just to put some numbers around this, so in terms of daytime temperatures, carbon fixation, or the ability of the plant to photosynthesize and create sugars, that's optimized in that 25 to 30 degrees Celsius daytime temperatures. It can happen at lower temperatures and it can happen at higher temperatures, but it's optimal in that range. And that's essentially where we've been, 25 to 30 degrees for the month of July. There were some days that weren't, but I'd say the majority were there. The cooler nighttime temperatures of 15 to 20 limit carbon losses, because at night the plants are no longer fixing carbon and they're relying on the sugars that they've made during the day to continue the respiration. If that nighttime temperature is too high, a lot of those sugars are used up as fuel for respiration of the cells. So slightly cooler nighttime temperatures, although not desperately cold, but slightly cooler nighttime temperatures limit that amount of loss of sugar or of carbon to due to respiration. So that 25 to 30 high in the daytime, 15 to 20 lows at night, that with ample water equals a high amount of carbon assimilation, and the net effect of that is growth. And as you can see the picture on the left-hand side, I just took that today. That's our Luckett Blanc. As our hedger is in the shop, it's well above the third wire. It's in desperate need of a hedging. And we've seen, certainly in our New York Muscat at the research station, Early last week, it was the time to go in and hedge those. We had shoots 10 to 12 feet long in some places. So there's been a great deal of shoot elongation, which isn't the same as saying the plants are at a later phenological stage. It just means that the distance between the nodes, between those bunches of leaves, is greater because there's that much more carbon available to elongate those cells. So definitely our growing season, Nova Scotia 2020, fits this profile quite well, and I think we're seeing that as a result. And kind of where are we going from here? I borrowed this from Environment Canada, picked this off their modeling site today. So Nova Scotia is right over here if you're having trouble reading this. And that deep color red over Nova Scotia indicates 80 to 90% chance of average or above average temperatures for August through October. So that's the rest of our growing season when you think about it. Now this is a forecast, and that same forecast existed for July, and July was a little closer to average. I wouldn't say July was that much above average. So we have to take these things into consideration. They're very long-term forecasts. They often don't make sense if you look in short blocks of time, like 1 week to 2 weeks. It's really how things are going to play out over that whole time period. So that's some indication that we're going to continue to see this trend that we've been seeing, and that it hopefully will carry on right through till harvest. I know Francisco's going to talk about phenology. I'll just very quickly show some some photos from our vineyard. So we have 3 different bunches of grapes here, 3 different varieties. The first one on the left is Luckett Blanc. The middle one is Riesling, and the one on the right is New York Muscat. And I've tried as close as possible to keep these at scale. So the Riesling actually had some fruit that was around 1 centimeter in diameter, which would put it more in the bunch closure range. Although if you just look at the angle of that cluster, it's not hanging down, which is typical of what you would see of a cluster of bunch closure. So it's probably somewhere between pea size and bunch closure. But certainly the Luckett on the left and the New York Muscat on the right, I would say those are definitely both a bunch closure. We don't see it the same way with those in terms of the tightness of the cluster because they're not tight cluster fruit. But certainly in terms of the diameter of the fruit, our New York Muscat was measuring, some of those berries were 13 millimeters. So that's well into the bunch closure range. And the Luckett was ranging from 7 to 10 millimeters. So we're definitely well along the road this year. And so I want to end with this slide, talk a little bit about where we've been and really where I hope we're heading. So if you look at, if you read textbooks on viticulture, there's a classic graph that looks a little bit like this, where they model out the amount of heat for the whole growing season. So this gray line, the gray line right here, is the same one from that very first graph that I showed you. This is the 10-year mean daily temperature, and it's for the Chemical Research Station. It's the exact one that I show you on that graph, but I've extended it out right to the end of our growing season just to show where we would expect to be in an average year. The black dots are, of course, our weather observations that we've actually made. It shows the same trends that we did before. But I have annotated the plot with lots of phenological stages to show kind of where we were, where we've been, and talk a little bit about where we're going. So our bud burst was a little late this year because it came on the heels of a very cool May. We saw some early bud burst in Canopy the 3rd week of May, and certainly for our vinifera went well into that 1st week of June. But because of the heat, flowering followed very closely afterwards. And this kind of shows the span that we saw in time for flowering, with Luckett and Marquette being at the left end, and our Riesling and vinifera being on the right hand side. So this still is, I mean, our flowering kind of came to an end at the end of that 1st week in July, which I think is early relative to the typical values that I've heard people talk about. And of course, the good temperatures that we had pushed us on very closely to where we are today. So we've seen bunch closure kind of starting in all of our cultivars, and it's still ongoing in our vinifera today. But This process isn't quite finished, but again, that seems early to me for bunch closure. If you look at the sort of the textbook graphs of the growing season and when things are going to happen, usually we like to see veraison happen in a perfect scenario, like they might see in France or some warmer climates. Veraison would come right here in the middle. So the first half of the growing season is getting us up to veraison, and the back half is taking us from veraison through the whole berry ripening stage right into harvest. Now, of course, we don't have that situation in Nova Scotia. That's not typical for us. And so I've drawn the ends of this bracket to kind of show where we could see veraison. In 2019, a very slow year, we saw it for some varieties well into September. And some of the early years for the hybrids, we've seen it in the middle of August. And of course, this would be ideal if we could see if the added heat, if there's an advantage to the added heat, it's that it makes each one of these stages shorter and gets us into veraison quicker. Because the quicker we can get into veraison, the quicker we can get through all of these components of the berry ripening stage. So the increase of the sugars, the lowering of the lowering of the acids, increase in color, and of course, right at the very end of that process is where the flavor compounds develop, and this is kind of the Nova Scotia challenge, is to get a season with early enough veraison. So for those who are making still wine, to get this flavor development in our grapes. So last year, 2019, was probably an example of a year where we didn't get very close to this. Some of these values here are values that we took from last year in terms of when veraison happened. And so we had a very short window for berry ripening and a cool fall. And by the time we harvested, there wasn't a lot of that flavor development. However, I put this up because this year is on track to be very different. And in fact, we're seeing trends closer to 2016 and 2017, certainly than 2018 and 2019. In fact, we're close in heat to where we were in 2018, but of course, 2018, that year was also shortened by the fact that we had a freeze late in the season. So I'm going to develop this graph more in future sessions and start to fill in some of these stages, because this question mark around veraison is critical. We would like to see this happen as soon as possible, and that's will give us an indication that we're going to have a really good year and good quality fruit. So that's all I have at this point. I'll turn it over to any questions, comments.
Any questions? I saw a hand raised.
I'll just, Jeff, you talked about the difference in that big rain event, and we got 49 millimeters here on that big event.
Okay.
And the observation we made is we had no puddles. It all soaked in. So there's no run, no puddles.
No, that's definitely a good sign. We did see some localized rutting of gravel roads around our vineyard, so we do know that there was some runoff. But again, that indication of 35 centimeter soil cooling is that's fairly deep penetration. That happened fairly quickly. So,
excuse me, in case if somebody has any question, please use the option of Q&A on the bottom, so we can read the question to Jeff. One minute, Jeff. I know we have some people with questions to you, so I will give like a minute.
Sure.
Here we go. Frank Varvenik is asking, it's too early to leaf thin Pinot Noir? Well, I think it depends on which stage you have your Pinot Noir. Because if it's like pea size or a little more than pea size, I think you will be able to go ahead. I don't know.
I mean, I guess if I were to consider that that leaf thinning to be a window, we would be at the very early end of that window, and probably that for hybrids. I would be nervous about limiting my carbon assimilation at this point, and really that where we want the temperature of the fruit to go up is as we get closer to veraison, where we want to increase that metabolism of acids and things like that closer to veraison. So I think there's lots of time left to leaf thin Pinot Noir.
Thank you, Jeff. If we don't have any more questions, thank you, Jeff. I would like to invite Deb Moreau to present.
So this is not going to be anywhere near as technical as what you just heard. This is really, I wanted to save some time for questions, should there be any. This is really just a compilation of images that folks have sent me in the last few weeks. And I thought it might be worthwhile just to kind of do a quick run through and see kind of a refresher. So you're probably starting to see a lot of earwigs. This is about the time that they start to show up. This critter really has a bad rap. Unfortunately, it's omnivorous. It just feeds on everything, but that can mean in some crops it can actually feed on the fruit. However, it is also a really good predator, and I wanted to show, I thought it was really interesting. So today I was kind of poking around. They're typically found in really damp, moist, dark places. So I almost always see them in vineyards that are still using wooden posts. The cracks and crevices in the post, they'll get in there. For those of you who've allowed me to run trials, wherever I put flagging tape or tags, they'll get in up under there. But today I was kind of poking around, and if you go to this image over to my right with the red arrow, so these leaves, it's hard to see, but this is actually a leaf roller or a leaf folder. So a caterpillar that's kind of folded over the leaf. And you can see the cerci, so what we call the pincers of the earwig. So it's actually worked its way up and it's in the leaf roll. They're incredible predators of eggs and larvae of quite a few insects and arthropods. So it does have a bit of a bad rap, largely because it kind of looks creepy, but really it's actually quite a beneficial, or can be. It can, if numbers are high enough, it can make a bit of a mess in your clusters. This middle image, it's hard to see, but this is frass. So basically insect poop. And high infestations mean a lot of it. And if they're maneuvering through the clusters where it's kind of dark, they can make quite a mess. This would not be a pest that I would recommend managing with sprays. That's really not a good use of hard-earned monies. And there's a lot of do-it-yourself traps that are really quite effective, corrugated cardboard, all kinds of kind of cool ways that you can kind of set up if you've got a bit of a problem, and trap these guys and then get them out of your vineyard. And it's certainly something I can talk about offline if you send me an email. So Erinia mite, I'm starting to see patches of it, which is usually what I see every year. It's typically very localized, meaning I'll see it in one section of a block. It's not necessarily when I talk about populations being localized, I'm meaning, think of it as if you had your variety block, it's very patchy. It might be in 1 or 2 panels, but not everywhere. So Erinia is actually the formal name of the gall, this blister that you see in the image. This is the upper surface of the leaf. So the adults kind of feed. It's a response of the leaf to the feeding. If you go to the underside, you kind of see that white. It's actually hairs that are forming kind of in that Erinia or gall or blister, whatever you want to call it. Early in the season, those those patches tend to be white. As the season progresses, they'll turn yellow and then eventually brown. And they can actually have a reddish tinge in red varieties. So I would scout when the flowers are separating. But again, they're really localized. Again, it's not something, for all the vineyards I've been in, it's not something that I would recommend managing unless you have, you know, really high population. So heavily infested leaves, multiple panels, where you could maybe potentially see sort of premature leaf drop. But typically sulfur early in the season will do kind of a double duty, mildew, and it will knock these guys down. But I warn you, it will also take down some of the beneficials that attack this mite. So in most cases in Nova Scotia, I've seen really good balance within the vineyards. We'll see some pockets of this, but there's enough of the sort of beneficial species that this is actually managed without intervention. Flea beetle, this is kind of, we're kind of past what I would consider the higher risk period, although they're going to kick around for a while. The grape flea beetle is the one that's more of a, for me, that's cause for alarm. You'll see it early in the season. You can see how it actually burrows and eats through the actual developing buds. And so if you have high numbers, obviously this becomes a problem. Both beetles are capable of sort of eating holes. I call it a shotgun approach. You'll see the sort of little holes all through the leaf. The red-headed flea beetle typically is going to start showing up anytime now, and you'll see much more of that sort of foliage damage from that. Both of these, certainly the grape flea beetle, but both of the beetles kind of migrate. So there's migrations of these guys. They come in early in the season, and they typically live on the borders in the hedgerows where they get refuge. Once the grapes start to you start to see the leaves, they'll start to move in. This is a tricky one. There are some recommendations in the States. Certainly Michigan's put it out for a steely flea beetle. If you sample 10 buds on 10 buds on each of 10 vines, and you see 2% or more of the buds that have been damaged, you should manage, you should spray. Again, I typically I worry far more about flea beetle damage on newly planted vineyards. So the little vines, when you're trying to push and get them to, you know, sort of push out vegetation, later in the season, this beetle can actually do quite a bit of damage to the leaves. Once the buds have sort of burst, though, for a grape flea beetle, the risk goes way down. Grape mealybug, this is probably the key. It's a very important vector of grapevine leaf roll associated viruses, certainly 1 and 3. Just a little kind of refresher. There's probably about, I think we're up to 11 of the associated strains of this virus. We know that 1 and 3 are actually vectored by insects. Not all of them are. I have been monitoring this now since 2016, and I have found very little of it anywhere in Nova Scotia. It does exist. I think compared to other regions within the country, like BC and Ontario, that have problems that actually have to manage this, I think that typically our spring temperatures are too cool. By the time temperatures ramp up and this gets going, the season is well underway. So I just don't feel that I've not yet seen populations get to a point where we have to be concerned. Having said that, it's actually, they're quite small, but it's relatively easy, even with my bad eyes, to see them on trunks and some of the main cordons. They look like like a little oval throw rug with a little fringe on the side. But the key, if you're trying to kind of hunt for them, look for ant movement. So both these pictures were taken in the valley, actually. So usually if I see a lot of ants moving up and down the vines, I'll look for mealybug and some of the scale insects. Honeydew, which is what the sugary substance that these and aphids, other insects in this family excrete, is kind of sticky. Again, in BC, they've got such a problem that the irrigation lines under the vines actually get sticky. There's just so much of this secreted. But I've not seen that here at all. So I would say look for a lot of ant activity if you're on the hunt for these. It's usually a good sign that you've got these or scale insects. But again, I've seen it only at 3 sites to date. So I'm finding a ton of leaf folders and rollers. They're different species. I'm not sure how queasy everybody is, but I will tell you I have a whole bunch of them that I'm rearing in my house. So my co-worker is okay with that to date. But so you'll see these kind of folded over leaf, tightly rolled, not so tightly rolled, a little bit of webbing sometimes will stick out. There's a variety of caterpillars. The 2 that I'm seeing mostly are the leaf folder, which is Desmia funeralis, which was in the newsletter. And I've actually just reared some out to adult, the red-banded leaf roller, which is a very common, both of these are common for here, but the red-banded leaf roller is something that I've seen in vineyards since I started looking. There's a lot of it. It's a fairly common pest of apples, so I'm not surprised we're seeing it. I would say, start monitoring, just kind of have a look. There are pheromone baited traps that you can use to help kind of monitor numbers and get a sense. Again, although you'll see a lot of these in some varieties versus other, usually management is not needed. If, especially for the organic growers, there have been situations where I've seen a lot of it, and it becomes an economic problem. There are actually organic options for some of these, so BT works very well. So I just kind of want to bring this up. This is still something that I think we have to really keep our eyes out for. So these are invasive species. There's also spotted wing Drosophila, but I don't think that that's really, I do see it in grape. I do see it in vineyards. We catch it in our traps. But I don't think it's as an important a pest in grape as these 3. Grape berry moth is, so I have yet to find it. And it's interesting enough, it's also not in BC. But it is in Ontario and Quebec. It's in the Finger Lake states. So I'm not sure if this is a kind of a maritime climate thing that it doesn't like. But monitoring for the invasives is key. So you're going to start to see the overwintering grapeberry moth adults present when the inflorescence are visible. So we're past that. But the real risk is to the fruit. It will start in the first generation. Once those sort of berries start to develop, it gets in there. This is grapeberry moth is a direct pest. So once it gets into the clusters, there's a lot of webbing, and the larvae literally eat their way through the berries. And if you have tight clusters, they'll just go from one berry into the other. And so they make the berries not even markable, unusable. And then they invite other problems like botrytis into the feeding injuries. So there are very effective pheromone traps for this pest. And we've had them out for a long time. It's my intention to put them out in the near future. If I start to see it, I'll certainly let you know. something to look for, kind of a distinct, if you open up a cluster and you see the webbing, the caterpillar, the young caterpillars are kind of yellow greenish, but they have a very distinctive black head capsule. As they get older, they turn a more of a dark purple. So if you see the webbing and you have any concerns at all, just contact me. I'm happy to take the sample off your hands. Just if you don't mind sacrificing the cluster, pick it off, put it in a baggie and stick it in your fridge, and I'll happily come and get it and rear them out. Japanese beetle, unfortunately, we have here, as I've said many times before, it was in Liverpool since the 1930s. Its first entrance into Canada is thought to have been on the Yarmouth Ferry. It's an amazing hitchhiker. It's a relative of June bugs, so the grubs are in the laneways or in the grass, the sod. It's the adults that primarily do the damage. They're very efficient defoliators, and you'll start to see those around flowering. Given the temperatures we've had, I'm expecting, I should backtrack, with the growing degree days that Jeff calculates, the base 10 is what we use for insect development, and we are actually further ahead now than we were in 2017. So for a lot of insects, that has the potential to be to help them in terms of more generations this summer. So yeah, so I would say you're going to start to see, usually if you see one of these, they're, from my perspective, they're cute as a button, but they're about 1/2 inch long, green metallic heads. You can't miss them, sort of a copper body. Where you see one, you usually see a cluster. If you see them on the leaf and feeding and you touch the leaf, their instinct is to drop off and play dead. So, you know, it's always good to keep an eye out for these guys. They can do a lot of damage in new plantings. Again, you know, they can move through leaves quite quickly. The multicolored Asian lady beetle, or often MALB, is here. I'm showing this diagram in the arrow because you want to know how to distinguish this between, this is an invasive species, but we also have native species. On the, just sort of below the head and the shell, the sort of wings or the wing pads, you're going to see what looks like a W, but if you read the literature, it actually is an M. It has that characteristic M or W on its head every single time. There are over 200 variations of patterns and colors in this species. So the little inset picture is to show you there's almost no spots on this guy, but he has that characteristic W or M depending on how you're looking. So you'll see these commonplace. Like other ladybugs, they're very effective predators, and they're a good predator of things like mealybugs, leafhopper eggs, things like that. The issue with this one in places, certainly in Ontario, for example, where you have very high numbers of these, they can get into the clusters. One beetle per cluster when you have a lot of them. So a lot of clusters with one beetle is the active threshold, can actually cause ladybug taint in the wine. So what it is when this particular insect, when it's threatened, so when you're starting to process, you get your must, it feels threatened, so it sends off this sort of alarm pheromone that results in this taint, or could result in this taint in the wine. So I've been working with Wendy McFadden-Smith at Omafra on a project with this. The good news is I just haven't been able to find high enough numbers in Nova Scotia to participate in a meaningful way, but it's definitely worthwhile watching for. And Phylloxera is here. I'm seeing lots of it now. The first image is sort of the underside of the leaf. So Sometimes in the early stages, this gets confused with eriniumite, but the blisters on eriniumite show up on the top of the leaf, and the galls on the phylloxera show up on the bottom of the leaf. And in the middle picture, you can see that the top of the leaf, those are the entrance holes into the galls. And I'm just showing the last one because you can have a lot of galls on one leaf. And it is, I agree, it's disconcerting. So I don't have a lot to offer on this pest. And I know a lot of folks are concerned. For vinifera, which is very vulnerable to this pest, the only solution at this point in time is phylloxera tolerant rootstocks. Hybrids can withstand, this insect lives in both the ground and on the leaves at the same time. For some reason in hybrids, it has enough of a resistance to this pest that any feeding on the roots doesn't impact the vine. And so the insect manifests itself, its feeding is primarily done on the leaves. But in vinifera, you'll almost never, I've yet to come across any galls on leaves in vinifera. The damage is, the insect, for whatever reason, is exclusive to the roots. So I would be, you should have already been inspecting your leaves for galls. There are other options for doing that. If you're worried, sticky traps, double-sided tape on the trunk. You can, if you have a decent hand lens, you can see, you can actually catch them moving up and down the trunk. So a couple tips, if you're cultivating or mechanically weeding, my advice is any block with phylloxera, wait to the end to do that block to avoid moving anything that might be in the soil into another block. You can use the traps. I do have a small trial that I kind of want to talk about once I finish this slide. Conventional management, there are a couple products that are registered. Movento, as far as I'm concerned, is probably your better product. I do want to say they will not eliminate this pest, but it will, you know, a couple applications over successive years will actually kind of knock your populations down. Earlier season chemical control is better than late, and that's because this insect has overlapping generations, and so there are lots, once the stages, eggs and things like that are not vulnerable to sprays. So you want to get them when you have a lot of crawlers and active feeding life stages. So there are some products in the States that are registered for organic, and I just want to say that one of those is neem based. And although I was hopeful, I did confirm with folks in minor use and PMRA. They were very clear with one exclamation mark that neem products will never be registered on edible crops in Canada. So so we're going to have to kind of go back to the drawing board and figure out what to do here. So we have a small trial going on this year. And there's some really interesting finds. I'm really looking at movement through the blocks, movement around the vine. But one of the things that we've started finding within the last week or so that's important for folks to know is that we're now having sustained catches of winged form. So that is meaningful because that is the stage that can move you know, elsewhere in the block. It can go to the next row or up the row. So definitely be looking at the panels where you have a lot of galls currently. And I think that's it. I realized that was super quick, but I really wanted to, I wanted to leave time should there be any questions.
Absolutely, Deb. As always, you had more than a couple of questions, and all of them very interesting. First one is leaf roll common in Nova Scotia?
It is. It is. And there are a number of species that leaf fold or leaf roll virus or leaf roll caterpillar.
It said leaf roll common. I suppose it's the virus.
So grapevine leaf roll associated virus is very common in Nova Scotia. We have found a lot of it, higher than I would have expected in a relatively new industry, likely exaggerated by the recent expansion program. We are, I guess, misery, if we take solace, we are doing much better than some of the other wine grape growing regions in the country. Probably because we have very little insect vector transmission.
And something from nurseries as well, do you think?
So I have trouble being charitable when I talk to the nurseries at this point in time. So their clean material is available in the great wide world. Nurseries are private entities, so of course making money is their gig. At this point in time, all I can say is that Canada as a country does not have a certification board or rules in place that require commercial nurseries to ensure that the material is free of virus. The Canadian Grapevine Certification Network, CGCN, has been created in the last 3-4 years and is working hard to sort of lobby for that. So in the meantime, that's happening. I kind of see this as running in parallel. So we have, think of the, blue sky goals of CGCN, and then at the ground level with producers, the responsibility really is the effort. Your work is going to be to monitor for vectors, know someone who monitors for vectors, sort of don't propagate within your own block if you know that if you don't know that the plant material is clean, just sort of those simple techniques.
And then I have 2 questions of phylloxera.
Right.
Okay, is phylloxera spread through nurseries? And what about insect predator for leaf phylloxera?
So phylloxera can move on nursery stock for sure. There is a dipping when plant material is brought into the country that I think they do. CFIA requires it for nematodes and certain diseases. So plant material, imported plant material can carry phylloxera. So it's that is a risk. The nurseries, I think, do an okay job trying to get the roots as clean as they can. In terms of, what was the second question?
Predator.
Right.
If they have a predator.
There are predators. And for most of the insects I spoke about, Erinium mite, certainly mealybug and scale insects, phylloxera, there's a general, there are a number of sort of generalist predators. So, think the folks that go to the buffet that we have here in Nova Scotia. So our little wildflower plot demo that we've been working on, so as I've been crunching the numbers, we've actually had some really interesting results in terms of how quickly we put these plants in and how quickly some of the key beneficial species that we were looking for came in. The warning is, is that you're not going to, beneficials, anything that's a biological is not going to behave the same way as a chemical. Chemicals are stable and they've been developed so that they give you consistent results every single time you use them. If we bring in a predator or parasitoid, there are other things that are impacting that species. So in time, I think, we find a decent balance. But there will always be, in biological control situations, there is always loss. It really comes down to how much, how much, from a producer standpoint, how much loss can you stomach, is really a tool. But there are some beneficial species that you can promote through wildflower planting, through certain choices in your laneways and borders, absolutely. And they will have impact on multiple species that will even extend to things like leafhoppers.
Deb, and I have one more question I think this will be the last, so we can move ahead. How to control ladybugs? Because somebody has a lot in Maréchal Foch clusters.
Is it the invasive?
I don't know, it's how to control ladybugs.
There is, we do have, and I should say that, we do have a native species, the 7-spot, that also can get in the clusters and do the same thing. To be honest, my heart is going to say, they do an amazing job. In terms of predators, ladybugs are brilliant. Getting in clusters is an issue. There are some techniques. If the person wants to reach out to me privately, or what I can do, Francisco, is I'll put together an actual, these are my recommendations, and then you can share it with folks.
Yeah, that could be great.
Okay.
We can put in the blog of Perrin as well.
Sure, I just would like it to be a little more thorough.
Okay. So thank you very much, Deb.
You're
As
welcome.
always, a very informative and complete presentation, and very interesting questions as well.
Thanks for the invite.
I will continue with the presentation now. It's my turn. At the end of the session, we'll have a section of question and answer. We'll be discussing with Steve Ells and Marcel. Now I'm giving like a small introduction of a couple of things that we will be talking. Now we're making like a summary of phenological stages and some canopy activities. I didn't put management because I'm not talking in general. It's a couple of activities. And so for this opportunity, I want to talk briefly about phenological stages, something similar to what Jeff did, but this will be very brief, and to pay attention to some differences. Leaf identification as well reinforce what Jeff already said about phylloxera, but also take a look about mechanical and chemical damage, and also downy mildew, because these are typical questions that we receive of what is that, okay? So just to keep in mind that. And canopy activities, already we discussed that in our previous session about tacking, but also I will include the leafing and hedging. And we will finish with the discussion between Steve and Marcel to try to take a little bit of each topic. So we already discussed about the phenological stages. So it's the development of growth in relation to environmental conditions. So depending on what is happening outside, as already Jeff showed, it will impact in one or another way to the plants through the heat on the root system, the environment, and precipitation. So it's important to track the stages to improve our management, because when we know when it's happening each stage, we can implement accurate practices to our sites. Because you will see in the next slides how is different the reaction of these plants with the Jeff ones. So till now, we have had two main stages, bud burst and bloom. If you remember in our first sessions, we talked that it's good to keep in mind at least four, which are bud burst, bloom, duration, and harvest. So in this case, I want to mention Frontenac Blanc and Riesling. These are two varieties in the same property. Frontenac Blanc, it's an early hybrid, and Riesling, it's a late vinifera one. So I have both extremes. Bud burst for Frontenac Blanc start on May 24, 2020. That was the date when we had the 50% of bud burst. Meanwhile, in Riesling happened on May 30. Okay, so you can see the difference. On the other hand, bloom, Frontenac Blanc reached the 50% of bloom on June 24. Meanwhile, Riesling reached the same stage on July 6. So you can see these two varieties in the extremes on the same property, they can react differently. And also, if you remember what Jeff already presented, is that his Riesling or vinifera varieties, they start at the beginning of June. So even though we are not so far, we can have some difference. I put this table so to show you in a way how it's possible to put the numbers and compare the days between stages. Okay, Frontenac, bud burst, May 24th, bloom, June 24th. The days between each stage is 31 days. Meanwhile, Riesling was bud burst on May 30 and bloom July 6, 37 days of difference. So this gives you the window to decide which variety will have the priority and when I have more time to react and to make some activities such as suckering, tacking, or moving wires. So to be prepared to having a good bloom. So I know it will depend a lot about the growing degree days, but if you start to build this data will be very beneficial for your archives and taking decisions in the future. So a couple of pictures. This is from May 31, 2020, and you can see Frontenac Blanc, how it had like 4 to 5 leaves. Meanwhile, Riesling was just starting. If we compare with July 7, you can see Frontenac already with the fruit set. Meanwhile, Riesling was just starting. So again, I insist, the same vineyard, but two different varieties can react in a different way. Leaf identification. Now I want to ask you a question. No worries, these questions are anonymous. I want to know, how often are you scouting your vineyard? Please, a couple of seconds. We already discussed this on our first session, that it's recommended to be doing like the scouting once per week, ideally twice. And it's important to be checking all the leaves on both sides, because we have to know what is happening outside and we can identify if it's an insect, a fungal, chemical, or mechanical damage. So doing the proper scouting will be able to take the best decision and spray the necessary products to manage and handle that problem, or to discard a problem and just to see that it's only a mechanical damage or something of that nature. I will give like a couple more seconds for everybody to answer. So in these pictures, you can see how we're paying attention to both sides. Okay, we'll end it and see the results all together. Well, we have 31% that once every 2 weeks, 23% that once every week, other 31% 2 times per week, and I can see 2 people more than 2 times per week. If you can be more often, ideally. If you have Vitis vinifera varieties, definitely you have to be more often outside. It's necessary, they are more delicate, the varieties, so you have to be on the top. So I will not take a lot of time because already Deb explained. On the left, you can see phylloxera. So you can see how the leaves and the galls are affecting the canopy. And you can see even how the leaves, they get so much deformation that it's difficult to identify. These pictures are only to compare how reacts or how is symptoms of phylloxera and Iranium mite in the vine, okay? This picture is to show the combination of two kinds of damages, mechanical and chemical. So you can see how the cut here in the leaf, on both sides, and also how some residues of chemical affected. I think that this variety was Marcel Kolb, Lucy Kuhlman. So we can have some chemical damage. This is another picture, but only chemical damage. And this was a Luckett. You can see how settled down and burned a little bit. You can see both sides of the leaf. It's possible to see this damage. Finally, a picture of downy mildew. And you can see very clear the oil spot taken with the sun. It's very easy to see, and against the sun as well. So we have a couple of different cases to see, okay, which it's the damage or the cause of the damage. It's quite important to be able to take the best decision and apply the correct products. Now I want to talk about the canopy activities. Tacking, already we have a talk and discuss about it in our previous session. It will be a variety priority. First ones, the early varieties, that's for sure. And because we provide a lot of advantage, we'll diminish the mechanical damage, we'll be able to improve the spray applications, and we'll have the fruit zone in a proper position. So at the time to having bloom, we'll have a nice bloom and we'll not have a lot of compaction, and we'll improve the aeration. So tacking has more than a couple of advantage to be applied. So they have to be well tacked between the wires, so they can be in a position when that at the time to do other labors, they will not be affected and move all around. For example, doing the leafing or hedging. In this picture, it's a vineyard of Luckett, and it's possible to see how on the base of each trunk, they desucker, they clean completely, but well, you can see in the middle of the row, and also you can see how the panels are very well tacked. So all the vines are growing quite erect and in a proper position. And on the top, it was not the time to be doing the hedging. So everything was done in a proper way and at the proper time to be progressing through the season. Also, you don't want to forget the new vineyards because they need similar labors. So the vines have to be tacked as well to diminish mechanical damage and for spray applications. So at the beginning, remember, you will have to be doing. And in this picture, you can see in the circles how each vineyard is well tacked, growing quite straightforward. Everybody has their own space. So in the middle of the row, the tractor can pass without problems and without taking any plant, and be applying all the spray products, all the necessary. Now I want to talk about the de-leafing. So also I have a question for you. So how are you de-leafing? Well, this activity is currently happening. It's depending on the growth stage of the vine, and it's focused on the fruit zone. So it can be mechanical, manual, or a combination of both. And the exposure can be from 50 till 100%. It will depend a lot of the management of the vineyard and which is your purpose and how much disease pressure. Let's take a look to the results. We have almost an 80% that is doing a manual de-leafing and a combination of both at 21%. Different strategies to be working and reacting in the vineyard. The important is to be doing a de-leaf. Which are the advantage to be doing de-leafing? Well, we will reduce the humidity of the fruit zone area. We will increase the temperature and the sunlight, and we will improve the fungicide penetration. So that means that we will decrease the disease or the impact of disease, and also we'll be able to enhance the quality of the fruit because the sun exposure will trigger other activities and diminish the amount of methoxypyrazines. So de-leafing can be manual, leaf removal, so requires a little more time, and it's important to define priorities, or it can be the morning or afternoon side. And I will suggest, or one recommendation could be starting with the morning side. Why the morning side? Because in the morning, at the sunrise, we'll have the first radiation from the sun, so will help to dry all the area, plus the airflow will diminish the humidity on the fruit zone area. So you can start with do the afternoon as well, but the morning definitely. And having only one side also will help you to have better penetration. And well, one advantage of manual removal is more gentle. In this video, we have Steve who is de-leafing the vines and show with some speed, just to show that it's to be so gentle and so slow. And he's taking and putting priority to the fruit zone to take between us 50 to 75% of the leaves, because he just wants to increase the aeration and improve the penetration of the fungicide. Also, we have other options, which is the mechanical de-leafing. As I know not many people have seen, we have here the example. Here we have two rollers, okay, which absorb the leaves. Here we have pruners that if it's necessary to be cutting anything going out, will diminish the amount of branches. And you cannot see, but you will see in this video. Here you can see how it's cutting. The rollers, they are pulling out the bunches. And this fan is helping to take out all the material, okay? So I have another question for you. Have you already de-leafed this season? I know was telling already Jeff about it, about the carbon. It's a possibility to be doing that now, that early, depending the varieties, careful. I wouldn't recommend nobody with peppercorn side. It's too tiny, so you can produce and cause some damage. If you have more than a pea size, it can be. If you think or you have your area with so much humidity, it will be a good idea to enhance the aeration and the penetration of fungicide. So we have you already de-leafed? We have 7% already de-leafed, 47 no, and other 47 work in progress. So it's normal. It's depending on the stage of the variety and how is the condition of the vineyard. So it's not a recipe here. It's depending and adapt the practices to your vineyard. Hedging. Here I have other questions. So this is the last one. Have you already hedged your vineyard? Well, depending on the vineyard, it can happen sooner or later through the season. So one of the main goals is to stop the overgrowth of the vines. But be careful. We don't want to wait until the shoots are laying down through the wires. I have seen in some cases that the canopy start to grow completely horizontal, and we don't want that. Let's take a look to the results. Okay, 50-50. 50 has a hedge, the other 50 not. Again, it's not a recipe, depending on many different conditions. It's good that we are aware of the pros and cons. So other goal of doing the hedging, it's because we will promote the growth of lateral. So these ones, they will be filling the trellis, and the new canopy, because they will start to develop a new canopy, will be active at ripening period. And it's at that time when we want all this canopy active, so it can be giving photosynthesis to the branches. Because all the middle and old ones, the old leaves, they will be quite old, so they will not be exporting photosynthesis, they will be consuming, they will be parasites. So only the top of the canopy at the end of the season will be active. That's why we want to enhance or create a new canopy. And also the goal is search the balance of the vine. Sorry. So parts of the vine desire to be hedged, it's the top. Here we have the same plot of Luckett that I showed before, but now already quite high. For the people who is doing manual hedging, this is the hedger. We have a side, because if we have laterals going out, they can be cut, and on the top to be hedging. So here, again, in slow motion, we have this section, so we can see very well how the machine is working, cutting on the top of the canopy and also the side. So to have a very nice wall of canopy and allow insist the good penetration of fungicides and have a very good aeration. Well, this was all my presentation. I want now to welcome Marcel Kolb and Steve Ells to have a brief discussion and to have like a brief continuation of the topics, especially of the canopy management. Because when we are doing this canopy management, we are also thinking in fungal disease management. So Marcel, I would like to know a little bit of what are you paying attention, which factors of the climate you consider when you are doing an spray application?
Well, I'm definitely looking at what the weather brings us these days, what chemicals we can use, especially with the high humidity right now. It's not good to use any sulfurs for that matter. So humidity right now is the biggest factor, and of course making sure that we're keeping on track with removing hedging or de-leafing just to get the airflow through it. That's all we can do right now.
Steve, which other factors you keep in mind or would seem?
Yeah, I think a lot the same. You have to be really aware of the weather. If you're using the contacts with the organic methods, you have to be aware of the rainfalls. Make sure you have continued protection. If you get those thunder showers like we've been getting this year, you have to get in there as quick as you can and get the protection back on. The humidity, the heat, you have to be careful spraying in the middle of the day for sure. I mean, we do a lot of spraying at night or early morning before the heat of the day. And we're always try to be quite aware of that.
Okay, yes, because with that huge precipitation, you are washing all the canopy. So some product can stay, another be washed. Yeah,
and then you really want to, you start thinking about your first botrytis sprays. It's especially with the vinifera, and we grow quite a bit of Chardonnay, so we really try to get in there with the machine and de-leaf to get those clusters opened up, to get the early botrytis sprays on them. I think that's quite important. We talked earlier about timing of de-leafing, but the goal on some is a little different than others. So with varieties that are very susceptible to botrytis and earlier deleafing, so that you can get that, lower the humidity, the drying time, and then also get the sprays on better is quite advantageous.
Okay. Marcel, how often are you scouting the vineyard? Do you receive some help in your scoutings as well?
Yeah, so I'm scouting pretty much every day. So as soon as my foot gets into the vineyard, the eyes are going onto the leaves. So there is a never-ending thing. Scouting is always present. We do a little bit of a game with our guys in the vineyard. We award a bottle of wine to anybody that finds anything new of the season. So it doesn't matter if it's phylloxera or downy mildew powdery or anything. If they can find it, they'll get a bottle of wine. But it's only for the first one, but it keeps everybody going and everybody's looking at the same time. So we know the pressure is here, and yeah, so we got to keep our eyes open.
And Steve, which is your strategy to be scouting?
Well, I mean, same thing. You're basically scouting all the time. I mean, to say once or twice a week is one thing, but like Marcel says, every time you step in the vineyard, you're scouting. And I take every advantage. And I know Marcel and I had the discussion the other day, the difference between scouting and observing. And certainly there's a difference, but any chance you can take to walk through and observe is great. And when you get down to that actual scouting, looking at both sides of the leaf and everything, that's even better. But yeah, it's a continuous thing every time you're in the vineyard. It's hard to scout the whole vineyard at one time, right? You more focus on certain varieties or certain blocks. It depends if you've sprayed or not and everything. One thing we use, I don't know if you can see this or not, but this is a map of the vineyard. And so we've got a block up in the corner for the date and the weather condition of the day. And then it's just blocked out in a big portion over here for notes. So I'll use this scouting some, and then also kind of do a daily or weekly report depending on the season of tasks that are happening and observations we make. And we've always got a few of those floating around the warehouse if people can write in what they've done or what they didn't do or anything. So any little tool you can use to help remember or keep track of it.
So it's interesting to see your approaches and using a map to focus or to know which areas are more susceptible, and Marcel, how to encourage the crew to be helping you and being your helpers. So, okay, so we identify and we see something right now, just for example. So which products will you be applying and at what time? Marcel, please.
I'm sorry, I didn't get the question all the way. What was that?
Which products will you be applying and when?
Ooh, well, that's well, right now it's trying to keep on top of any possible downy. So we're definitely on it with. We have some sulfurs going out. We haven't used any copper. That's like my last little resort that I need to, but we're using some Mansate. We had tried some Volpan earlier in the season as well. So we're switching things around, but we're keeping the big guns handy, and we had to use them already. And that's Pristine, just to make sure that with this pressure that we're having right now, that we're definitely not getting any surprises anywhere in any, especially the higher value blocks. So I'm talking vinifera here. Yeah, so we're switching things around a little bit, but mainly with everything that's going on right now, you're out there every 14 days, like almost every 14 days. Right.
And Steve, how is your approach?
Yeah, I mean, we're a blended approach, right? We're not 100% organic, but very similar to Marcel. But yeah, with the heat and humidity, and also keeping in mind, especially in the vinifera, the botrytis thing, we've switched to Serenade Opti instead of sulfur a little bit. So copper for the downy, and then Serenade Opti for botrytis and powdery mildew at the same time. It's a nice combination to go with, both organic products right now. I'd agree with Marcel. I mean, the conventional approach to keep that 1 or 2 applications a year pristine is it's a very effective product, but you have to be really mindful of resistance to it. So conditions like this, where we've got these thunder showers and high humidity, it's perfect conditions for a lot of these problems that we can get, the mildews and the early onset and development of botrytis. So where we are right now, I think that, you know, some people, it's probably a good time to think about some of those things. But yeah, it's kind of pretty similar approach. I think it's the same thing, but downy, we're really concerned with downy right now. Conditions are pretty much optimum for it. So we're making sure we keep protection on. So I was spraying until 1:30 last night.
Well, good for you.
Yeah. It's fun.
I want to touch something about crop load, and I have 2 questions from the public. So to make it here out loud to both of you. So my question is about crop load. When is the time to be acting or reacting about crop load, and how you can see the situations in your properties?
You want to go first?
Please don't fire.
Steve, go ahead.
Well, I think crop load, so there's 2 different issues with crop load. One of them is fruit quality and one of them is vine health. And I mean, fruit quality is something you need to talk to your winery and winemaker about. It's a whole nother issue. It's the thing that I think right now you need to focus on is vine health. So we're coming out of 2 horrendous years, and a lot of the vines are still stressed. So you need to really tailor that crop load to get a vine healthy again. It's almost vine to vine in some cases. You see a vine, you know, with low shoots struggling. It's got 2 or 3 or 4. I mean, some of our Luckett has 4 clusters on it. If the vine is struggling, get rid of a couple of those clusters, get down to 2, right? It's all about balance of the vine health and the crop load. So that's kind of where we are at it. Luckily enough for us this year, where we don't have enough labor around as usual, we seem to be pretty self-regulated. So we're not too bad. The vines are coming back into health from the problems of 18 and the down year of 19. Most of the vines are pretty well balanced, but we're certainly looking at some of them to go through and take some crop off. Just anything that looks like it's struggling, we'll take kind of a percentage of crop off that is comparable to the percentage of struggle the vine's having. Just trying to maintain that balance.
Yeah, so yes, I definitely have to agree here with Steve. Plant health is the very first thing you got to look at in your vineyard. There is still some vines out there that are still trying to recuperate from 18-19. So definitely, if you find vines in your vineyard that have shoots that are maybe 6 inches to a foot long and have 3 clusters on it, it's not anything that a plant can sustain. Rule of thumb for what we've been doing for the last couple of years that worked out fairly good is if the workers find a shoot that's between 1 and 2 feet long, all the clusters come off. If you have a shoot that's about 3 feet long, leave 1 cluster, and anything above that, you leave your 2 or 3 clusters on, depending on what the total strength of the vine is. It's fairly simple and it goes quickly. It's not that much work, but if you don't remove those clusters, you're just going to continue with the same issue year after year after year till your plant eventually dies. So yes, yeah, that's pretty much crop load. If you have been in touch with your winery already, or the winery has been in touch with you, you can get some great information from the winemakers on what they actually want to see. Do they want to see a full crop? You know, is there any goals that you or that they want to see you achieve? And that, of course, can also dictate a little bit the price depending on what it is or what they want. So talk to them early so you can react early to get the most out of it by the time harvest rolls around.
Okay. I want to leave a message because it's 8, so I don't know the session if it can close. So first of all, I want to say that in case of somebody has any question related to ladybugs, please write a message to Dr. Deb Moreau. She will be more than glad to answer your questions, okay? And I will go with the 2 questions. First of all, somebody's asking, I'm having excess vigor on vines such as Baco and Leon. Aisles are large at 9 feet. Vine spacing is 3 feet. No fertilizer in 2 years. Try for canes every 4 and 6 inches. Any options to lower vigor? I'm thinking pulling every second vine to 6 feet spacing next spring. Somebody?
Well, yes, leave more canes to slow down vigor. Leon is a beast. If there's barely anything you can do with Leon except leave more buttwood at the end of the when you're pruning, just to slow down the vigor for a year or 2 and then start going back into the usual rhythm. Pendelbogen works great, or make a double Pendelbogen if you need to have 3 or 4 canes just to slow the vigor down, and stay focused on your nutrition. See what you can change, maybe add a different cover crop in that will drain some of the extra nutrients out of the soil.
Yeah, the other option is to be using a cover crop. So to
Yeah.
make a competition as well to the soil.
Yes.
So
Yeah.
the cover crop can compete for the nutrients, and it's not only the vine uptaking everything.
Yeah.
So it exists options for management. Other question is, can you recommend a good online vineyard management program which has the tools available systematically and follow serially over each year and then compare subsequent years as opposed to paper and pencil and notebooks? If not, Gigants should develop one in the market. Are you aware of a program, an online software to be helping to the track of the season?
Yes, there is. There is software around, but please remember it's only as good as the information you're putting in. So it will take years and years and years of making sure that you have every little bit in there. But I think there is software out there.
Yeah, exists program software. One very well used in US, especially in Napa, it's called Fruition Science. I'm not here giving publicity to any company, but Fruition, it's a very good program that you can be putting data. It's always independently of the program, you have to be entering data. So to see and have some numbers, you will have to be doing measurements. It's a tool, and the base of the programs is Excel. So if you can develop your own Excel, it can be very helpful because the programs, they work in the same base. Other Australian software, again, I'm not giving publicity, but it's called VinTrace. I think it has some section of related to viticulture, but it's very tiny, it's not very big. That is more for winery. Exists a couple of options, but not too many outside. And as Marcel said, it requires a lot of data entry. We have another question is, does crop load balance also depend on whether vinifera or hybrid? For example, can hybrid have more clusters?
Yeah, I would say, I mean, it's pretty common that we put a little more crop on the hybrid than the vinifera. I mean, that has to do with ripening time and everything. So definitely difference between the hybrid and the vinifera, but it's, I think would you agree, Marcel and Francisco, both it's even different, it's variety to variety, maybe not
Yes.
even just hybrid to vinifera.
Yeah. Yeah. And it can sometimes even vary in the year as well. So yes.
Yeah. And then also what you want to do with it. A sparkling Chardonnay can carry a lot more crop load than a still Chardonnay. So there's a lot of factors, but yeah, it's all
the
different.
best thing to figure out what to do crop load wise is talk to the winemaker. He can usually tell you what he wants to see from your blocks or from your varieties.
Yeah, and then plan those blocks right from the start, right from pruning all the way through the season, instead of trying to decide if a block got good enough for still and that one didn't, so it's Chardonnay. So it's better to plan and tailor your crop load and your management right from the start.
Yeah, I think it's important to know what the winemaker wants to do, because if he wants to make a sparkling wine, the vine can hold a little more grapes compared to a still wine. So
it's
it will
also
depend.
the amount of work. Sorry, it's also the amount of work that you're putting in as well. So makes a big difference. Yeah,
I'm agree. But for example, can hybrid have more clusters? As Steve said, usually it can hold some more clusters. They are a variety more adapted to these tough conditions. They ripe the fruit faster, so the plant has some more time. The vinifera is shorter, the season for them. Well, I think we are arriving to the end of the session. We have touched very different topics. As always, thank you very much, Jeff, for all the update of the weather, how has been progressing, and his observations in the vineyard where he's working, how evolved the phenology. Deb, as always, giving and providing all her knowledge and trying to give us more calm to define out which insects have more priority and the disease. My presentation was mainly to open the door to our discussions here to talk about the management. Again, I know, Marcel, you really like the topic of spraying and also crop load. I know. And to be able to be answered also questions from the public, which is the main goal of these sessions. I don't know, Steve, would you like to say something?
Thanks for all the presenters and thanks for everyone joining in. And I think we're thinking of doing another one of these in August. We're going to keep trying to roll them out every, 3 to 5 weeks kind of area and touch on the main tasks coming up and the main things to think about in the vineyard. So I'd really like to thank Francisco for all the work he's doing on this. It's been a challenging and a very interesting year for the changes and best practices in our second year of doing it. So I think it's turned out really well, and Francisco's a big part of this. So thanks to Perennia and Francisco for doing this.
Yes, thank you.
Well, thank you very much. Thank you very much, everyone. We have recorded this session, so I can expect the next week, most probably, will be available, the presentation. So thank you very much to everyone, and have a good night.